there is this uniquely Jewish saying about Ochavruta or Mituta,
Yep.
which you do a much better job of translating than I would.
Either friendship or death is basically or camaraderie or death. It's one or the other. If you have no friends, if you're on your own, then yeah.
And that is scientifically supported.
Yeah.
Being a part of a community is directly linked to longer life, to life expectancy.
Hi, welcome to the Z3 podcast. I am Amitai Fraiman. I'm the director of the Z3 project. This is our podcast in which I sit and interview different guests to expand the discourse about Jewish peoplehood and identity beyond just our brick and mortar work. I'm recording this on 12 days into the war in Israel. And in this conversation, I sit with Dr. Yochai Shavit of Stanford University. He's the director of research at the Stanford Center on Longevity. He's also a personal friend. We served together in the military, so hear a little bit about that, of our shared experience around it. And in this episode, we talk about what are the range of emotions that we might be feeling in this moment, how to cope with it. We talk about being grounded in the moment and mindfulness. We talk about different lenses through which we might see the world and we experience it, and what we might be able to do if we're flooded. It's important in this moment because of how the world seems to be unraveling. I want to make two important points about this episode. The first one is that Yochai and I, in these conversations, as they generally are, it's a personal conversation in that he doesn't represent the center on longevity, and it's his own personal opinions. And the second piece, which is really important, is that with everything that's going on, if you are feeling overwhelmed and in danger or afraid in any way, I urge you to go seek for real support and professional support in mental health. There are lots of online opportunities for this as well. BetterHelp, who's a local community member of ours, is a good one because everything that we talk about in this episode does not substitute professional help and one-on-one interventions in moments of grief and of anxiety. So that's the caveat for this conversation. And again, in it, we cover a range of topics that have to do with emotional health and kind of the role of community and how to kind of help ourselves cope with these dramatic events that we're living through. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Also, our conference is coming up November 5th. It will be a great gathering for our community to be together and heal together and talk about what we're going through. And please share this episode and follow us on our various platforms, on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on TikTok, on YouTube as well. And enjoy the episode. Thanks for joining us. All right, Yochai, it's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me
on the Z3 podcast. I know we go way back, but before we get into that, I just introduce you to our listeners and to our audience. Yochai Shavit, he has a PhD in psychology from Stanford, and he's the director of research at the Stanford Center on longevity. I mean, you'll tell us more about what that means, but basically I think what's key here is that you are very much immersed and expert in your field, and we'll talk about that more and its relevancy to this moment we're in. We're recording this now. It's October 18th. It's the 12th day of a unfolding nightmare
some
in Israel,
X number of days since our world has ended, basically.
Exactly, yeah. And we'll talk about that as well, and the implications of that. But really, this podcast, the Z3 podcast, is meant to be a place where we extend our conversations outside of our conference and hear from different experts in issues that pertain to Israel, Jewish peoplehood, identity. And in this moment of crisis, I think it's incredibly important that we have a conversation with experts like yourself about what people, or the range of emotions that people are going through, and maybe how to cope and how to think about it. So I really am appreciative of this opportunity, not only for our listeners, also for myself as someone who's going through this as well.
Same. One thing you learn doing research on emotions for as long as I have is that every conversation about emotions is therapy for oneself as much as it is informative to anyone else. So thank you.
Good. I'm glad. I'm really glad. So we go way back.
Yeah.
Yochai and I, we served together. We served together in the IDF, and we'll get to that. But I am curious a little bit, maybe in a sentence or two, like what led, like before that. Like what's the background
the background for
your your story, like your origin story.
Okay,
I'd say, like, what's
yeah.
Yochai's origin story? Grew up in,
So
I mean, I know,
Yeah.
I know what your Abba was involved with, and so like there's like it's all going to be connected and reveal itself. So
Right.
that's the thread we're going to tie through here. But yeah.
No, and it's actually interesting to try and tell it through my connection as an Israeli to the concept of Jewishness in general and Jewish peoplehood in particular. So, born and raised in Israel, just outside of Jerusalem. Grew up in something in between what you'd call a secular and a traditional Masorti kind of family. My dad is Ashkenazi, so he was completely secular. My mom's half Sephardic, half Yemenite, so there's more of the traditional aspects from there. And then throughout my childhood, we did the usual thing of like celebrating holidays, going to synagogue like for Yom Kippur. And then right around my bar mitzvah, we got to know the Reform Synagogue in Mevaseret Zion, what's now known as Kamatz. And that was the first time where I really came to a discussion within myself and my family, around how do we actually relate to being Jewish. And we found in that Reform congregation that it allowed us something that was nowhere else to be found, which is to very much invest ourselves in our Jewish identity without feeling like we have to sacrifice any of our otherwise liberal values. It allowed us to be together as a family during meaningful moments. First and foremost, my bar mitzvah, but then every Shabbat following that. And that really, I think, changed the conversation among and the relationship in my family in general and within myself, within me. Specifically around how do we position ourselves in the global Jewish world, because the Reform community in Israel back then was incredibly small, quite ostensibly marginalized from anything. So we constantly looked out and were in touch with people from Jewish diasporas around, from everywhere, particularly the U.S. And I think it really got me to go past that barrier that I feel like many of us in Israel have of us versus them. Like we are Israeli, there is Jews, and those two things are not quite compatible. And I think further down the line, I'll pause for the army and go back to it in a second. When I was later a shaliach at the Hillel in San Francisco for a couple of years.
An emissary.
Emissary, thank you, yes. Yeah. So I was working with Jewish students through the San Francisco Hillel, and with my dad's involvement in first the World Reform community, and then specifically within the Jewish Agency. I always felt like I have a slightly different level of conversation with with people in the U.S., especially from the Jewish community, than many other of the emissaries, which went for better and for worse.
Different because of your experience growing up and being exposed to Reform Judaism earlier on.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And because I feel like I truly feel a sense of peoplehood in a sense that's not obvious to many who grew up in Israel, and you really have to have this frequent interactions with the broader Jewish diaspora to develop that. I mean, it became clear to me how essential it is to keep having this. It's not even a dialogue. It's more if we would have a term for a inner community monologue, I think that would be a better explanation, because I don't feel like there are two sides. There is one side, but we use slightly different terms or points of contact.
You mean like on one side in terms of like the Jewish people and our sense in our expanded sense of identity and its different expressions?
Yeah.
Maybe,
Yeah, that's a very good way of putting that.
Yeah.
So back to my life narrative.
Yeah.
So I went to high school in Jerusalem, and throughout my life, because of my dad's also involvement in the army through his reserve unit within the 10 Corps, it was obvious, all but certain that I'll go to serve in the 10 Corps, which I inevitably did. I think I was one of the, when I came to the, when you join the army, as you know, but maybe some of our guests don't, on the day you join the army, you have a meeting with a placement officer, and then you say what are your preferences for joining. And I said, well, I really want to go to the 10 Corps, and he looked at me like, you sure? And I was like, yeah. And then told him all of my family history with the 10 Corps. Yeah. So that's where I found myself.
I want to pause there for a second, because people might, like, I totally understand what you mean. But just like there is I'd say, it's an imperfect comparison, but just like as there's like a ranking of universities or colleges in the States, there are units that are considered, within the Israeli lore that are much, the more elite they are, and that typically means more infantry, or if you're or the Navy or the Air Force, the more prestige they have. And the Armored Corps, which I also served there very, very proudly, isn't necessarily considered, by the way, unjustifiably so. It's the best unit by far, but it's not considered in the public lore always as the most desirable unit, which is what Yochai is referring to when the placement officer was like a little confused at why one would be so motivated to join.
And then when I started basic training in the 10 Corps, I kind of understood what he meant.
You're like, oh wait.
It's not the easiest experience for many reasons, and it certainly wasn't for me the easiest. But nonetheless, I derived a lot of meaning from it, and it did what I think serving in the army does for many people, especially those who don't serve in those elite, highly selective units, which is really put you in touch in daily, intimate relationships with people you've never would have come across before. We've had people from the rich north of Tel Aviv serving alongside people who lived in very poor, come from very poor socioeconomic backgrounds in southern Israel, farmers with people who majored, who had a high-tech concentration in high school. It was really a really eye-opening experience to the Israeli society as a whole, and at the same time to the complexity of human nature, if you will. So that's when, afterwards, when as I moved along in my service, and it was very important for me to become a tank commander, which again was, all of my army experiences have been challenging to say the least, but I've eventually finished the commander's training course, and when I was eventually placed with as a basic training instructor,
your life changed because you met me.
Exactly. So not just you, although I will say, just as a complete side note, that one of the most memorable moments I have from being a commander involve you.
Oh no! Because
it was the end of the end of the weekend, and we had you all clean up your
I remember this.
your barracks, and so being neat and tidy is a big thing, especially in the tank corps. So we'd be very much on top of all of the new recruits, but we were, kind of like over it because all of the staff had to stay there for the entire weekend, and we didn't want to be as on top of you as we normally would have been. So we just gave you the times and said, do this, and that, and we'll come and check you very seriously afterwards. And then we retreated to our quarters, and then all of a sudden we hear that, "Attention, sir! Attention, sir! Attention, sir!" From our quarters, which you were not supposed to go to.
Yeah.
And there was Amitai asking, "Can we just have 5 more minutes for to finish up whatever it is that we needed to finish?" And I just remember being, on the one hand, shocked that you would do that, to come to our quarters and just so blatantly ask for more time, and on the other hand, impressed that you'd take the initiative to do that, because clearly we were in the wrong there. Someone should have been there to help you, but that was just such a clear, sort of quintessential basic training memory.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to add for color, just for the audience, that Yochai is being very kind to me, but I, the point of basic training and boot camp is, right, it's to instill a high level of discipline.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that has to do with as expected in these, and we can and maybe should have a conversation about what does service do to people, right? And the price that comes with that. Yes, on the one hand, I'll speak in I statements. I'm extremely proud of my service and what I did, and I think that overall I stand by the entirety of my service, and also there's a price to pay, and we can talk about that price as well. And I think it's part of the conversation that's all. But in basic training, part of that discipline is this idea of not approaching the barracks of the commanders, is because they're supposed to create a sense of distance between us, and the audacity of walking up was much more probably has to do with stupidity than initiative, but that's kind of the environment in which this happened. And I think that the point is that there's that dynamic, right, of discipline and hierarchy and structure is something that it alters something inside us, and it could be good, and it could also be very destructive.
Yes.
I just wanted to add that as we're kind of bring that up. But so in the service, so you were a commander, you're in basic training,
and this is where, and it's part because of that, I started to realize the both within myself and within the soldiers I was working with, exactly those types of emotional and psychological tolls that people encounter in the army. The thing I enjoyed most was, despite what it may have seemed like at the time, was not to tell you drop and give me 20, but rather to sit down and have a one-on-one conversation with. I
was going to say, it was very clear. As I was preparing for this conversation, I was reflecting back, because Yochai and I, although we go way back, we haven't been in touch until I moved to Palo Alto, and now our kids are in school together, right? But if I'm reflecting at the staff that we had, I'm like, it was very clear to me that you weren't enjoying yourself.
I was not.
You were not having fun.
No.
As opposed to some others who really did.
Yes.
Enjoy the role of being in charge of discipline and kind of berating soldiers. I'll leave names out of this, but it was it was obvious that this was not your comfort zone.
No. Yeah. And that's what got me into psychology, really. Okay. It's that experience and realizing those tensions and dynamics that happen within us, within our minds, and when few minds interact, that really drew me to psychology. And that's why I decided to major in psychology after the army. My special interest in psychological development throughout adulthood, with an emphasis on later life, came from, so at the time my father was, just as I got out of the army, my grandfather, was experiencing a very rapid decline in their health, so in his health. So I was with him quite a lot, because I had the time. I was right in between army and university, and we had a very strong bond throughout my childhood. And so I was with him a lot, and with my grandmother a lot, and I started noticing and seeing that there is a lot of emotional need there on both their ends, and we just had no idea who do we turn to, who's there to help. When we tried to talk to people around, they were like, "Oh, there's no difference between the psychology of older adults and psychology of younger people. It's all the same." And my lived experience was that it's not quite. There are some unique challenges that people are facing. So that's when I decided to focus more on late life emotional development. And the more I got into it, the more I realized that alongside the risks that come with growing older to psychological well-being, the data is quite clearly that older adults are doing emotionally and psychologically better than younger people.
So just to make sure I understood that, you're saying that yes, there's the obvious decline in health, physical health, maybe mental health as well, but from an emotional perspective, there's actually very strong indications and data to back up the fact that the older people get, generally speaking, emotionally, they're actually more secure, or more, like, what's the proper way to, like?
Yeah, I think the most accurate way of saying it is they're more stable in the sense of, like, more grounded, and specifically experiencing fewer negative emotions. The data on positive emotions is a bit a bit less conclusive, but definitely on balance, the balance between negative emotions and positive emotions improves as people get older, up until the point where people are, like, really nearing the end of life, and it's just overwhelmed with health declines. Of course, we are living dementia out of it. The reason why we are living severe health decline and dementia out of it is because those are not inherent parts of aging. Those are things that are associated with aging. The risk for both increases as people get older, but it's not what we'd call normal aging. There are plenty of people who reach old ages being healthy, being mentally very, very sharp and together, and by and large, it's the data is pretty conclusive on the fact that emotional experiences improves as we get older.
That's interesting. Do we know, I before we dive into some, like, more practical, because I have some other questions also about the service. I'm curious about, like, our comparative experience, because we've had maybe parallel. But just before we get into there, and I mean, we'll go back and forth, so this is not a definitive list of questions. But is that, there's, like, what's the term, like the like living room psychology, like we're sitting on a couch, psychologia b'shekel.
Yeah.
We're sitting on a couch, but you are an expert. I am not an expert. But is it like, do we know why? Is it like a chemical thing? Is it just like what we call, like, just being mature? Is like, what do we know? And then does the why? That's part one. And part two to that is the why. Does knowing the why help us understand what we can do in order to kind of create more resilience or coping mechanisms and tools?
Those are two great questions.
We can end here.
The first, yeah. The first one is easier to answer but doesn't have a clear-cut answer. Okay. The second one is a lot harder to answer. So in terms of the mechanism behind it, there are a few major theories, and it's quite probable that some elements of each one of them is supported. But the theory that guides much of my work, my PhD advisor's theory, which is called socio-emotional selectivity, which is, to the best of my knowledge, the most empirically supported theory that can explain this, what some people call the paradox of aging, that despite losses and despite health concerns, emotional well-being improves, is that as we get older, we realize sort of naturally, because we are, most of us are sort of, not hallucinating human beings. So we realize that that there is a limit to our future time on Earth. That what seems like incredibly open-ended, and I can do anything and be anything when we are younger, or as we get older, we are coming more and more to terms with the fact that our life is finite. So we are aware that we have that the time is limited. We are also aware that we have less of it, which is in many ways adaptive, right? When you're younger, you need to have this future-looking outlook, because you do need to worry about things like money and education and social standing, and because those might be relevant down the line. But once we get older, our focus is much more towards the present moment, and as a result of that, older adults focus more on things that really matter, in the here and now. So they're not going to waste time on things that are not sort of like what we'd call emotionally meaningful is the term we often use, and the compounding effect of focusing on things that are on doing what you want to do and what you feel like you really value spending your time on, is better emotional well-being, and has been several aspects of this theory have found some support in more experimental work.
So basically, if I have to this is for me like a processing out loud, right? But to simplify it, the older that we get, the more experiences that we have, the more grounded we are in reality per se, right? Because we recognize, and maybe not always are willing to admit it, but to the the fact that we have limited time on Earth, and therefore we choose to focus on things that we realize that are much more in the moment. And I say the inverse of that is like when we're maybe younger and in theory everything is limitless, then also things can be more dramatic because their implications in theory are much more dramatic, right? Because like I can do anything, so every little thing that happens now could change everything, right? And you're getting older, like, well, maybe not so much. It's actually like life is we don't know when, but we have a fixed amount of time, and a better focus on the now, and not everything's so dramatic. Like it's passing.
Yeah, I like that connection that you're making here. I think, and here I'm just pontificating, but following your logic, I think it's fairly reasonable to say that the necessity to worry about the future when we are younger is much more relevant to our life and informative to our daily experiences than it is when we are older. So worry, which is again an emotion or experience that we know for as much as certain as I can say, coming from social sciences, which is always 80% certain. But worry seems consistently to go down with age. People worry less and less and less. Worry is also a very preparatory kind of mental pattern, right? If I worry about it, which is by definition worrying is about something that's not happening right now,
Right.
And I might be able to prepare for it.
Got it.
But when I'm much focused on the here and now, there is less to worry about, because I don't need to prepare for tomorrow.
Also, the
as
range
much
of
as I do.
and also the range of possibilities that I need to prepare for is much smaller.
Yeah.
Right, when I'm worrying, I have to prepare for 17 scenarios. As if I'm focused now, I have the now.
So, yes, in terms of the
Like the mental capacity it takes of us, the toll that it takes on us. That's what I'm like curious about.
Yes, I think in general, worrying involves many possible
Right.
unknowns, but the need to bother yourself with the unknown is much more adaptive when you're younger compared to when you're
Even the need to do it. Forget,
Yeah.
let alone what happens while you're doing it. While you're worrying, the need to worry is something that is much more prevalent as you're younger, and as you grow older, you're like, okay,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. So I mean, so in theory, and this is I guess the second part of the question, if we were able to kind of train ourselves not to be more, I don't know if grounded is the right word. I don't know if I don't want to sound judgmental, but like realistic or more in touch. I don't know. I really don't. I don't want to use a judgmental term, but like if we're able to train ourselves to be more in the moment, then in theory, we can reduce anxiety.
Yes, and that's where I said that the second question is a little harder to answer, because to the best of my knowledge, there hasn't been any interventions directly trying to translate some of the psychological strength that we associate with older age to younger ages. But one thing, exactly along the lines of what you were saying, that had been studied repeatedly, are all kinds of mindfulness trainings, where really the key message is focus on the here and now. Let worries be thoughts. It's also a part of cognitive behavioral therapy for various affective disorders. But sort of recognizing that thoughts are thoughts. They don't have a truth value in the world, in the concrete world of right here, right now. Don't go into this rumination cycle of thought, negative thoughts feeding negative thoughts, and worries feeding worries. And by focusing on the here and now moment, you eliminate your mind's need to worry in some way. And we know that mindfulness interventions are quite effective.
So if I make it practical, like instead of like going like sailing or like following our worrisome or our worried version of our imagination, being in the moment, feeling tethered really, and like kind of pulling us back into where we are, helps us. So like if like in this moment there's war and we are being bombarded, I have to really change my lexicon now. We're being flooded with information and images and sounds and memories and experiences, and that opens a doorway, more like I'd say like a barn door of emotions that can flood us. And so maybe like a useful tip for folks who are listening or in this moment or in others is to put the phone down, obviously, but also go outside, like make sure you're breathing fresh air, you're looking at the sky, feel the ground beneath your feet.
Yeah, it's amazing, because I think that would be my sort of like number one message. And I know I sent you one thing I've encountered on Facebook the other day, but just last night I saw something else that is directly related to that. It's a post by a woman who was in the party at the Nova party,
Yeah.
and ran away and hid inside a bush for 6 hours while there are obviously explosions and gunshots, and people can't even imagine the horrors going around her. But her whole post is about how even in that unimaginably dire, terrifying moment, she inside her bush, she took deep breath. She noticed the sky. There are birds still flying. Was grateful for the bush that's around her. Was grateful for the earth that's beneath her. And really, it's the most poignant and difficult use of those mindfulness practices that I've ever heard about.
It's incredible that in the moment she could even and
Right.
then retell it and reflect on it. That's
Right.
that's quite powerful. Wow.
But she's quite adamant about that. That's what got me through those hours. It's our minds are incredible. For better and for worse, our minds are incredible. Because obviously the flip side of that, of being really grounded in the here and now, is that barn door that's being gusted open by a hurricane wind, and everything that's being flooded, and carries you with it, and yeah.
Yeah, we're seeing that. So how does we'll tread here carefully because I'm like concerned myself. But how does this moment for you, being here as an Israeli, as someone who's served in a tank, in combat, in Gaza, how does that, what does that awaken for you? I myself also, just for that, I was in Gaza, I was in a tank, in a different war. I have my whole set of emotions about that and what's going on. But I'm just curious, not like, I mean, both as Yochai person, but also as Yochai the expert, right, who understands like what's going on, to the extent that you're able to reflect on it in this moment. Like, how does this come together for you, and how does this meet? Like, how does this play out?
Yeah. It's awful on so many levels. On the most visceral level, it's awful because of my mind immediately shifts to, for me, there is a very specific date, which is July 16th, 2014. I was just, Alma is my oldest daughter. She was about a month or so old at the time, and my company was called up for Operation Protective Edge, and just it's a very physical feeling of being tense, being alerted by everything. That phone rings, an email notification pops up. It's immediately like, where do I need to go? Who's calling me to be where? And we didn't have any time to prepare really mentally before rushing into Gaza. And we were all reservists. We were my reserve unit at the time. The company is attached to a regular army company, so we are a reserve company within a regular army battalion. So we went in as straight as they did, but we came from our homes, jobs, families, babies, and it is still taking me a long time to process it, regardless of the fact that now it's going on again. So I was certainly not prepared mentally, and I'm carrying that with me ever since. And the second that obviously I knew that my old unit was called up within days after October 7th, and so on the one hand, I'm mentally not here in the US, mentally not even in Israel. I'm mentally in Israel in 2014, which makes it incredibly hard to focus, and goes directly against everything that I know serves good emotional well-being, and it's still a struggle. But what did help in terms of my knowledge is to force myself to disentangle and be grounded with the people in the here and now that I care about. So the other part of social emotional selectivity theory with the emotional is the social, is who do you spend time with. And one thing we know also tends to happen as time horizons shrink and people are focusing on the future is there is a natural gravitating towards spending time with the people you care about. And even though that was definitely not my immediate sort of like instinctive reaction from where I was emotionally, I knew enough to tell myself I can't give in to my instinct of just like shelling up and crawling and just leave me and furiously looking onto flipping through social media on my phone. I have to take this time to be grounded in my meaningful immediate social relationships. I'm incredibly lucky to have a spouse who's also who is a mental health professional. I'm not a mental health professional. And two wonderful daughters who have a very unique social and emotional sensitivity towards their father, and that really is what allows me to keep making hard choices to not go down the path that is so easy to go down.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm hearing also like, so there's work that we need to do on our own in terms of grounding ourselves in the moment, right? We're on the stage, on a couch, my feet are on the, I feel the feet, my shoes, texture or whatever. And then there's also just being within community and being with people and family and
Yes. And the way that this connects to me, for me, from the emotions and theory and research world, is that one thing, there are certain situations we meet in life that deeply shake our sense of meaning. And we have a very specific definition for a sense of meaning in life in our field. And it comprises of three things. It comprises of a sense of coherence, so that the world around me makes sense. There is like some causality that I can trace in the world around me. A sense of purpose. There is a higher aim or goal towards which I'm living, or that I can identify in my world. And the third one is a sense of mattering, which is I feel like I'm a meaningful part of my social networks.
Interesting.
And community is really the only, or some sense of community, whether it's physical and present or more virtual, but some human connection is incredibly, you can't have a sense of mattering if you're not in a social environment. You can't know that other people see you, care about you, and need you for their own well-being unless you have this connection.
Really, community hits all three,
Yeah.
right? It gives you order and predictability. It gives you purpose, right? And it gives you that sense of mattering. And that's why it's such a powerful tool.
It really can, yeah.
Fascinating. I haven't thought about it that way.
And I think that's why, in part, we see that so many people rush to volunteer. It really is a single action that really captures all three. I'm doing something, so I know there is a cause and effect.
Yeah.
The thing that I'm doing is really good.
Right.
And I'm doing it with either directly with others, but definitely for others.
Right.
And which is really catering to a sense of mattering.
Yeah, it brings me back, and such an important insight you just shared there, Yochai. Really, I mean, like, one of the biggest drivers of our work, my work, my own sense of work, but also what we try to do at the JCC and Z3, really, and I, quite frankly, it's a Jewish idea. It's not uniquely Jewish, right? But it is, in our own kind of language, is like the role of community. Like, Judaism isn't about, in Jewish life, and we'll go back to this of just this your field is emotions, and that, for me as a rabbi, this is my world. But the technology of community, right? It's almost, I'd say, pointless to be like Jewish in a desert island on your own. Like, really, like, for what, right? But in community, it doesn't matter where you are, right? As long as you have the community with you, and it really creates that sense of order or predictability and purpose and mattering. And I really like how it also, from a scientific perspective, right? Like, it validates it, right? It gives it another source of just another source, right? To these ideas. And I think in this moment that we're in, it's so necessary. And I think, and just like one half other thought, and I'm curious to hear your reaction to it, is like, the idea of community has been totally, what's the word I'm looking for? Bastardized, right? Like, everything's a community, right? Peloton's a community. We work together. Like, everything's everything, right? Because the corporate world identified how powerful that need is, and tapped into it. Right, and first it was iPhones. Like, no, we don't want that I anymore. Now it's got to be we, right? And to get what's the together? And what gets me so activated about it is that I feel that it really, really cheapens what community means.
Yes.
And then it also hollows out its ability to provide us with what we need as humans to be emotionally sound and healthy and live a productive life, because we don't have real communities. Now, they could be virtual. There are real communities that are virtual. That's not the point. But the point being that, like, if everything's a community, then there is no such thing as community.
In some ways, yes. So I think if I'm picking up on what you're saying, is that there is a sense that some corporate world had cheapened the meaning of the word community to simply be being together, or being with others.
Yes, a lot of people.
Yeah, exactly, a lot of people, which is certainly not what we mean by community. Now, if there is anyone here who's a member of the Peloton community, it's possible that you have a group of Peloton members that you feel like they need you and you need them, and being there and working out is really something that you deeply value, and having that Peloton meeting once, I don't know if they do it every day or every other day or whatever, but having that sense of structure is really grounding, and it can be. But what I would urge all of us to do is to really think about the elements of my life that are characterized as a community, and think, is it really a community? Am I getting the type of really benefits of being a community that can be gotten? And as you were talking and making that connection to Jewish life and thought, there is this uniquely Jewish saying about ochavota o mituta,
Yep.
which you do a much better job of
Yeah,
translating than I would.
Either friendship or death is basically or camaraderie or death. It's one or the other. If you have no friends, if you're on your own, then, yeah.
And that is scientifically supported.
Yeah.
Being a part of a community is directly linked to longer life, to life expectancy. And so I think our ancient ancestors were truly onto this even before they had the statistical tools to show that it's there.
I was holding myself back, but you opened the door. You took my bait. You're inviting me in. So I'll say that there's a piece that I find helpful. I don't know if it's like Jewish stoicism. I don't know, but like this idea of living in preparing for the future, whatever. But being I think to me that connects to this idea of like time arising, shifting, and as we get older, recognizing our limitations in the now. There's a saying, I'm going to botch it, but basically it says something. It's like it's much better. It's preferable to go to the house of mourners than to the house of a party. Okay? And I think that and it's not about I don't think it's about a morbidity or about this idea of we need to be serious all the time. I just think that if we look at those two ways of being as paradigms, when you go to the house of mourners in a Jewish setting, right, it's life affirming, right, and sitting shiva and all those things are about being within community, or how do we reintroduce ourselves into community. It's not about, it's quite the opposite of what we might think. And on the other hand, this idea of from a Jewish perspective, simcha, beit mishteh, I think is a term, an ale house or whatever. That's, if I have to superimpose it on the paradigms that you were introducing, is this idea of limitlessness. Everything's possible. We can do anything, right? But that is not fundamentally grounded and concretized in a way that is emotionally supportive and helpful or healthy of who we want. So when you were saying that, I'm like, oh, that's I went straight there, and how knowing that and being in tune with the cycle of life, and that it's not never ending is actually quite helpful, I think, and healthy.
Yes, yeah. And there are two parallel thoughts that come as you're talking, and the first one is that the awareness of mortality is not about death. There is a whole other theory called terror management theory, which is what happens when you prime people with death, that has similar predictions. But we older adults, from any survey that we know, are not preoccupied with death. Right. They just don't. Death is something that's going to happen in the future. I'm not worried about the future. Yeah. I'm worried about the now. And younger adults are much more preoccupied and worried about death and dying. Older adults worry about, if anything, about the almost technicalities of how and where, but not about the mere existence of death.
Interesting.
And
which tracks, because it's not a fascination with the thing. It's much more about, okay, so there's the now.
Right.
Yeah.
And while I think that both have positive, so I'll use the terms that we often use in the literature, which is positive affect and negative affect. And I do agree with you to a sense that there is slightly maybe more depth of experience in negative aspects. And again, I'm half pontificating here and half drawing on literature, but the fact is that in most studies of emotional experiences, and perhaps even in many languages, certainly in English, which is the language we conduct research on, there are far more negative emotions than there are positive emotions. For years, the study on specific emotions focused on 6 basic emotions. There is one positive emotion, that's happiness. And there are sadness, anger, fear, disgust, and surprise, which is sort of like in between. But out of those
like Snow White's.
4 of them are right, but 4 of them are negative, and that whole body of research comes from like studies of like both cultural and physiological studies of like what are the recognizable emotions, and that's what those 6 are called, the 6 basic emotions. To paraphrase Tolstoy, I think there are infinite ways of being sad, and everyone's sad in its own way, or there are infinite ways of negative emotion, and we each have our own point of entry there, and that's why I think being there for one another in times of sadness could possibly be even more meaningful than being there with one another on times of sadness, on times of happiness. Sorry, is that sadness, I feel like, offers an entryway into a meaningful joint relationship, joint meaningful experience in ways that happiness perhaps less so. Positive affect, again, I'm drawing on a different theory now. Positive affect is a very outward-looking sort of experience, while negative affect is much more inwards looking. So being happy together is incredibly important for its own reasons, but I do think there is something special in being able to be there for others in times of need, and again, it's not just that you are there for others, it's the act that being there for others directly relates to your own sense of meaning, because now you matter.
Yeah, I like that. I haven't considered that. And I really appreciate that insight, because the way I was approaching it was as like a paradigm of like a lens through which to see the world, which is one layer. But you're saying it's yes, and more than that, it's the simple fact of being there, right? Like Beit Avel, this idea of being in that moment is it allows you to tap into an emotional depth that isn't necessarily available in other settings. And in doing that, you're also creating community and service and being in support of others. And I think that's incredibly, incredibly powerful. And and to be clear, like this isn't about like creating like a morbid outlook at life. Right. It's not about not about that. It's about recognizing how we work, like how we're wired, how we experience the world, and then how do we create the sense of meaning. And I had another thought that I thought was brilliant, but it evaded me, so it will forever be brilliant. But those two pieces there, I find that incredibly meaningful. Oh yeah, I remember it is. So it's not that brilliant, so you're gonna have to hear it now. But I think that like that like there's many examples and of this, but primary thinkers who talk about the interaction with the other, right, is where God reveals itself. And I'm not talking about necessarily, although I am an Orthodox rabbi, about like a external existing deity, but actually just elevating like the idea of God as a call to elevate ourselves as humans is revealed itself in interacting with others. And when we see that in the others, because that external experiment or experience really calls on us to be more than just ourselves. And so yes. I think that like that interaction builds community, and I think that in seeing other people's, like the difference between sympathy and empathy, right? Being in the moment with somebody is what allows us to do that. So I'm just like, I know we kind of like went all the way around here and all kinds of different things, but I
that's how I think. So
no,
we're right in my wheelhouse.
This is the best part of what I get to do. But just to bring it back to the moment we are in, because the moment we're in is quite dramatic. I think that for folks, like everybody's consuming the news differently. Everybody's consuming this moment, and it's hitting us in different levels. Those of us who have layers or degrees of trauma might experience it more than others, or differently maybe is a better term. But in this moment, like, so I just bring it back to that. It's like finding community, finding people, acts of service, acts of kindness, is actually much. It might sound trivial, but it really is the healthier approach by far, and more effective for the world than just the alternative, which is sitting on our own and kind of like getting pulled into that negativity and that.
Yeah, it goes far beyond the fact that it's the quote unquote right thing to do.
Right.
It's almost the necessary thing to do to make it through.
Right.
And I think one challenge that I'm taking on myself right now as we are speaking is to also instill that in my case within my daughters and so to integrate those practices into our lives and take this as this horrible but opportunity to shape how we think of a healthy or longevity supporting lifestyle in a way. So we're not going, and I haven't been doing good enough job of that, but instead of saying we're going to the vigil because it's the right thing to do, because we need to show our support for our community, also saying, and it's important for us to go, and it's important as part of how we make some sort of meaning out of this incredibly horrible situation we're all in, and just to really make it a part of we're doing it for us as much as we're doing it for others, and that there is no distinction between doing something for someone else and doing something for yourself.
I like that. That's incredibly powerful and important as parents, as a community. How do we talk about this to others, to our kids, to our community members? And I like that idea of like there is no like there's that the endless debate in Friends, right? It was just right, like a truly altruistic deed, right? But like there really is, there are moments where there's really no distinction.
Yes, and it's a real debate in the whole literature on altruism as well, whether there is really anything, and it gets way more philosophical than it does even empirical.
Right.
But I think that exactly as you're saying, recognizing those moments where there isn't a distinction, and there doesn't need to be a distinction.
That's what I think is important.
Right?
It's okay.
Yeah.
It's really okay that we too need to be supported, and we can do both.
Yes.
I think like giving people that license to because some people are like, they feel maybe shame or guilt, like I'm here and I don't know, and how do I show up, or do I have to? Maybe I have to feel bad so I can empathize. Like, it's okay. Like, this is a terrible nightmare that we're all going through in varying degrees of exposure to it. Recognizing how lucky we are that we're here, and also what is the price that people are paying so we can do this, and then how do we show up for ourselves and others so we can really honor what's going on, and also have a long and healthy life. Right?
Yeah, and I think that's exactly where it taps into the whole idea of community, and it relates to something that comes from cultural psychology, which is a distinction between what they call independent cultures, the cultures that put the individual at the center and then it has circles around them, versus interdependent cultures in which one cannot be oneself without relationship to others. And I think coming from
that's such a Jewish idea. It's like unbelievable.
Right.
Like
and I think, and this is one thing that I think is perhaps more evident in Israel rather than the U.S. The U.S. is one of the most independent countries in the world as a whole.
Right.
And I think if you're living within if you have this interdependentness, as many of us in the Jewish community do, and certainly many in Israel have, but living in an independent world, it puts you in this constant doubt as to can I do something for myself here, or if I'm doing something for other people, it by definition cannot be something I do for myself. And I think we should lean into the interdependentness of Jewish culture in times like this, and rid ourselves from the need to make those distinctions. I mean, we have so much else to worry about right now, that worrying about, am I doing it for the right reasons, is, I don't think, very helpful.
Yeah. I think that's really, really powerful, really important. I thank you really for doing this conversation. I really do appreciate it. It was very restorative for me to be able to talk about it and gain some a little bit of the scientific side of what's going on emotionally and in a community sense, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to also to hear about like practical tools and lenses through which to see the world, to help us as individuals and as community to cope with this, this war that's going on. And I do want to say this, and I'll say it also in the intro, like none of this can or will replace mental health support. So if you someone who need, if you feel like you need, and you're overwhelmed, and I'd call them, this is totally cheapening it, but like mindfulness tricks, right, or behaviors aren't cutting it. Like if you need help, like seek help. It's so incredibly important, generally speaking, and in this moment as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And often those techniques might be useful just to get you to the point where you can sort of more clearly evaluate what's going on. But those are, you can call it first aid, that does not...
First response,
It does not replace any actual professional help.
So thank you, Yochai. Really, it means the world to me that we had this conversation.
And thank you for this opportunity, as it was as restorative and as important for me to be able to share this, not for the benefit of the world, but again for the benefit of myself and my own.
Both can be true. Both can be true.
Exactly.
Both can be true.
For myself, and helps to generate this narrative together.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right.